What's going on, guys? This is Junior here, and today I'm gonna show you how to send emails using Spring Boot. Almost every application you use, if they collect information about you after your name, it's gonna be your email address that they're gonna ask. If you think about your banking application, your social media accounts, your school, all these applications have your email address, and it's one of the most common ways of communicating in this world of the internet. So knowing how to send emails to your customers or clients is crucial to any application. And this is what I'm going to be showing you how to do today using Spring Boot. I'm going to put this into context, and what I mean by that is we're going to imagine that we have users coming into your application and they sign up with their email address, and we want to send them an email so that they can confirm their account or email address. So we'll be building a small microservice where users can sign up or register for a new account, and then we will send them an email to confirm or verify their new account or email address. I'm going to teach you a few different ways that you can send emails. So I'm going to show you how to send simple text emails, and then I'm going to show you how to send emails with attachment. Then I'm going to show you how to send embedded files in your emails. So you wanted to make sure that once the email is open, the file you sent with the emails can be seen immediately. So you want to embed the files in the email body itself. So I'm going to show you how to do that. And then lastly, I'm going to show you how to send HTML email. So these emails you get from your bank or your school that look like an HTML web page, I'm going to show you how to send those as well. And I'm going to show you how to both add attachments to HTML emails and how to add embedded files in the HTML emails as well. This course is really hands-on. This is literally the only presentation that there is in this course. After that, it's going to be only coding. So we have a lot to do. Let's go ahead and jump right into it. So I have Spring Initializer open, and I've already filled out the project metadata. As you can see here, it's going to be Maven, and I'm going to be using Java and also using the latest version of Spring Boot. As you can see here, we have 3.1.1. Packaging is a jar, and I'm going to be using Java 17. So now we're just going to go ahead and add some of the dependencies. So obviously we're going to need the web dependency, so I'm going to add that. I'm also going to need JPA, so I'm going to add the Spring Data JPA. I'm going to add in a database. In this case, I'm going to be using PostgreSQL, and also I'm going to add the mail. So I'm going to type mail. So we want the Java mail sender. So I'm going to select that. And then I want Lombok. So I'm going to say Lombok. I'm going to add that in. And lastly, I'm going to be using Timeleaf. So I'm going to say Timeleaf because we need this template rendering engine so that we can send the HTML email. So I'm going to select that. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 dependencies in this project. It's going to be a small project. I just want to show you the demo of how you can send emails, but we're just going to make it like a mini project that you can actually just use and then expand upon. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the generate. That's going to download a zip file on my computer, as you can see here, and then I'm just gonna go ahead and open it up in IntelliJ. So I have the project open in IntelliJ, and I'm just gonna go ahead and click on build and then build the project. But at this point, you shouldn't have any errors or anything. The project should build, all the dependencies should be installed, or if that didn't happen, then whenever you run the application, they will just install, because IntelliJ will kick in this process. But you can see at the bottom left corner here, it says build successfully in 4 seconds, and I have this new target folder that was created in my application. Okay, so we know that everything is good. And the first thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go inside of the application and I'm gonna rename this file. So I'm gonna do refactor, rename, and I'm just gonna name it application. So I'm gonna delete that and then refactor. I'm gonna select all and then click OK. So now this is refactored. So now the name of the main application class is just application. So everything is good in the neighborhood. What I'm gonna do next is to start working on the user, because we're gonna assume that we have users coming in and they're gonna sign up, and then we're gonna send them an email. So just remember that the focus is going to be on sending the emails and not on like the user itself. But since we want to put this into context, then I'm just gonna, create the users and pretending that they're signing up for something, and then we're just gonna send them the email upon signing up. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm gonna go ahead and right click on the main package name and then do new, and we want to do another package. So that's going to be the domain. Oops. So domain, obviously this can be model or whatever other name that you want. And then inside of there is where we're going to create the new user. So we're going to say new class, and then I'm going to say user. Press enter. I'm going to collapse this and we're going to work on the user. So the first thing, we need to give it an ID because we're going to be using Spring Data JPA. Also have to make this private. Okay, so we're going to have the ID and then we're going to have the name. So I'm going to keep this very simple. So we're gonna say string name, and then obviously we need the email. So we're gonna capture another string for the email. And then we want maybe like a password just to make it make sense. Obviously we don't need these things for the emails that we're gonna be sending. And then lastly, we can do, let's do a Boolean, and that's gonna be is enable. Okay, so we're gonna assume that when the users sign up, they're not enable. So we're gonna make this Boolean false. And then once they open their email and then click on the link that we're gonna send them, then we're gonna make this Boolean true, which means now they can access our application or they're enabled as a user or a client. So this is the user class. I'm gonna pass in some annotation. So we can do maybe all our args constructors. So since we have Lombard, we should be able to see that. And then I'm gonna pass in no args constructor. I might not use all these constructors. I'm just gonna put them in anyway. And then I want the super builder, and we can pass in a name to this builder, by the way. I wanted to show you guys this. So if I go inside of this annotation, you can see that for the builder and the build name that you're gonna call to create a new object, you can change those names as well by passing in the builder method name and the build method name. You just override these two values, but I don't need to do that. Okay, and then after that, I'm gonna add some getters and setters. So I'm gonna say setter, and then I'm gonna add some getter, and then I'm gonna pass in the add entity because we want JPA to manage this class for us. So I'm gonna add the add entity, and then lastly, I want to change the name of this table. So I'm gonna do add table, and then we're gonna pass in a name. So we're gonna say the name of the table is going to be, we're gonna name it users. Okay, so the name of the table when JPA creates the table for us is going to be users. Gonna scroll up some more, and then we're gonna denote this as the primary key. So we're gonna pass in the ID on this, and also gonna pass in the add generated value, and then we're gonna do strategy, and then just pass in auto maybe. Okay, so that should do it. This is just an example. Obviously, if we were going to create an actual user for a real application, then we would have to think this through and then probably define an entire sequence for the ID. But that should be okay for the purpose of this course. So this is the user, very simple and very clean just for our demo. And what we need to do now is to create another class that's going to be the confirmation. So whenever a user creates a new account, we're going to create a confirmation for them, like some kind of an object with the user ID. And then we're going to assign them some kind of a key or some kind of a token, which is what we're going to send them in their email, so that whenever they click on the link that we're going to send them in the email, then we're going to enable their account, turn this value to true. It's all going to make sense as we work through the code. So let's go ahead and work on this confirmation. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to right click again, create a new class, and I'm going to name this confirmation. And in here, well, let me copy some of the stuff that I have in here already, and let's go back here. I'm gonna paste this in, import everything, and also I'm gonna copy the ID because I know these are gonna be the same. So I'm gonna paste that in there just like that. Okay, so now I have, I don't want the all args constructor, so I'm gonna get rid of that. I don't want the builder, so I'm gonna get rid of that. And I want the no args constructor. I want the setters and the getters, and this is going to be an entity. The table name is going to be confirmations. I like to have my table names in plural, so that's why I'm overriding the table names, but this annotation is not really necessary. And then I'm going to do Control-Alt-O to clean up all the import and also rearrange the import, and then I'm going to collapse. Okay. So let's scroll down here. The next thing I need is the token. I'm just going to name it token. You can name it a key or something. So this is going to be what we're going to be sending to the user as their confirmation. So this is the key that they have to give to us so that we can look their information up in the database and then confirm that this is really who they are. And then we can pass in maybe a date. So the date that we created the confirmation. So we're going to say local date time maybe, and then pass in the created date. Okay, and then lastly, we're gonna pass in the user. So the user, this confirmation is for. So in here we can say this is gonna be of type user from the class that we just create, and then we're gonna name it user. The confirmation ID is gonna be the same. The token is gonna be just a token. We can pass in some cool annotation on here. I guess we can pass in maybe like temporal, and then we can say this is going to be a temporal type, and then we can pass in the timestamp just to denote that this is a timestamp. And if you want, you can add, I think it's called created created date. Yeah, you can pass that in there as well. And then I'm gonna put some more spaces, and I'm gonna say for the user is going to be a 1-to-1 mapping, because we want one confirmation to be for one user. And then we can pass in the target entity. In this case, that's going to be the user class. And then we can say fetch and pass in the fetch type of eager. And I'm going to scroll up a little more. What else we need? We can add the user ID inside of this confirmation table that JPA is going to create for us. And the way you do this is to do, I think it's join column. And then we're going to pass in some properties in here. So we can say nullable false. I think false is the default, but it's not going to hurt. And then the name is going to be the user underscore ID. So whenever JPA is going to create this confirmation table, well, it's going to name it confirmations. It's going to add the user ID, this field that is going to be created inside of this table. So it's going to pass in the user ID as a foreign key that's going to be in the users table. Okay, so the table from this class. And then the last thing that I need is a constructor. So I'm going to say public, and that's going to be confirmation. And this constructor is going to take a user. So whenever I'm going to create a new confirmation object, I want to be able to pass in the user. Scroll up some more. And then we're going to set the user to equal this user. And then we're going to pass in the created date. So we can say created date, and then pass in the local date time. So local date time dot now. And then we're going to pass in the token. So we're going to say this dot token. This is going to be some randomly generated token. So we're going to say UUID that random, and then turn it into a string. And that's all we need to do. So now whenever we are creating a new user in the application, we can also create a new confirmation. We're going to pass it the user, and then we're going to set these values, and then we're going to save that new confirmation in the database. What this is going to do is it's going to create a new confirmation row in the table. And then for the user ID as the foreign key, it's going to use that user ID in the users table. Obviously, this is just one approach, but you can design this in different ways. If you want to just create the tables yourself, set the foreign keys and primary keys yourself, you can do that. But we have JPA, so we're going to be using JPA because JPA is going to do all the heavy lifting for us. We don't have to write any SQLs or anything like that. I like to write my own SQL queries, and I also like to use JPAs. I mean, it depends on the complexity of the project, but I like both of them. So it's up to you what you want to use. So we have the confirmation, we have the user. So we should be good to go to create some repositories so that we can start saving some of this stuff in the database. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and close everything. Close all tabs, and then I'm gonna create another package. So I'm gonna right click and then go to new package, and then we're gonna name this repository. And then in here, I'm gonna have the user repository. So Java class, this is going to be the user repository. And then I'm gonna select interface, press enter, and then we're gonna extend the JPA repository. So JPA repository, pass in the user as the type and the primary key, or the type of the primary key, which is a long. And then I'm gonna import that user class that we just created. Okay, and then I'm just gonna define maybe two methods. So the first one is gonna return a user. It's gonna be find by email ignore case. So we're gonna pass in an email, and then it's gonna try to find the user for us. So that's gonna be the first method. If you want, or you probably should, make this return an optional so that you can throw an exception, but we're just gonna keep it simple. And then the second one is gonna return a boolean, and then I'm gonna call it exist. We can do exist by email, and then we're gonna pass in the email as well. So we're gonna say string email. So what this is gonna do, it's gonna see if the user by that email exists, and then it's gonna return true or false because it's a boolean, so that we know that if someone already exists in our application, then we can't register them again. So we'll throw an exception, or the application will throw an exception, because I'm not gonna be handling exception in this course. But the application itself will just throw an exception if we're trying to save a user that already exists, or we'll just throw a runtime exception if that is true. So that's something we can do as well. So this is going to be the user repository, and if you want, you can pass in repository in here, but I don't think this is required anymore. It will still work. It's not gonna hurt anything, but it will work regardless, even if you don't have this annotation of repository. Okay, so that's all we have to do here. I don't think we need anything else. We're gonna create the confirmation repository. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm gonna copy everything inside of this class, and then I'm gonna close it, and then I'm gonna right click on the repository, do another new class. We're gonna name this confirmation repository. It's gonna be an interface. I'm gonna press enter, and then I'm gonna just select everything and then paste. I'm gonna rename this, and I'm just gonna say confirmation repository. Now I'm gonna press enter. So confirmation repository. We're gonna pass the confirmation class in here instead of user, and we're gonna try to import it as well. And in here I need one method, so this is gonna return a confirmation. So I'm gonna say it's gonna return a confirmation. We're gonna say find by token. So we're gonna give it the token, and then it's gonna return us the confirmation, and then we're gonna say string token. Okay, then I'm gonna do Control-Alt-O to clean and rearrange the import. So now we have the two repositories, so the confirmation repository and the user repository. So that means that we can persist the user and also the confirmation, like any object that we create off of this class, we can persist them in the database using JPA. So now what we're gonna do next is to just create a simple service, which we'll be able to use in our controller or in our resource. So let's go ahead and work on that right now. I'm gonna close everything again, and then I'm gonna right click on the main package, do another package. This time I'm gonna call it service. And then here we're gonna have the user service. So new Java class, and this is gonna be user service. And well, this is supposed to be an interface, so I'm going to change this to interface. So what we're going to have here, just going to be really simple. So we need one method that's going to return a user. We're going to call it save user, and then we're going to give it the user. Obviously, in this case, you would probably pass in like a user DTO request or something like that, because you wouldn't use the domain class in the controller. Like you would have some kind of a way to map the requests coming in to the user in your domain, because the user coming in from the request wouldn't have like all the fields that you have defined. For example, whenever we're gonna send a new user to be registered, we only need these three, right? So we need the name, the email, and the password. We don't need the enable because we're gonna disable them by default, and we don't need the ID because JPA is gonna take care of that for us and generate the ID as the primary key in the database. So you would have another class like user DTO request or something, and then you would pass it in here in the service. You would have something in the middle that's gonna like translate the user request to a user, and then you would save it in the database. But again, I'm pretty sure most of you guys already know that, but we're just gonna keep this simple because this is not the main focus of the course. I just want to have some context so that it can make sense, and that's just going to open your mind as to when you might want to use emails in your application. So we're going to have one to save a user, and also another one that's going to return a Boolean that's going to verify the token. So we're going to say verify token. So the token that we're going to generate and save in the database, we're just going to verify it whenever they give it back to us. So that means when they click on the link and they're verifying their new account. And I'm talking about this, if we go into the domain, go into the confirmation, we're going to be confirming this token right here. Okay, so that's all we need for our service. We're just going to give this service one implementation, and then after that, we should be able to move on to do some email stuff. So let's go ahead and give a simple implementation for this service. I'm gonna go ahead and close everything again, and then collapse the domain, the repository, and inside of the service, I'm gonna add another package. I'm gonna name it IMPL for implementation, and then I'm gonna create the implementation for the service. So Java class user service IMPL. Press enter, and then we want to implement that service. So user service, and then we're gonna define these methods. Implement methods, just two of them, and then we're gonna press enter. Okay, so now we can inject our repository. So we're gonna say private final, and I want the user repository. I'm gonna name it user repository, and we also need the confirmation repository, private final confirmation repository. Okay, all right, and then we're gonna do the dependency injection via the constructor. So first we need to denote this as a service and also pass in the required. So we're gonna say required args constructor. Okay. All right. So our dependency injection is done. I'm going to collapse these imports and scroll up a little more. So all we have to do now is to use these repositories to save the user and then get the token and verify it. So pretty standard stuff, nothing really complex. I'm assuming your application will be way more complex than that, but at least it will give you like some context around sending the email. So now let's go to the, let's do if the user repository. So we're going to call the user repository and then exists by email. And then we're going to pass in the user that get email. So if this is true, then we're just going to throw an exception. So we'll say something like throw a new runtime exception, and then we can pass in a string, say email already exists. Okay, so we're not going to try to add the user again because they're already added in our database. And then I'm going to put this on one line. Otherwise, we're going to call the user repository again. They're just called save. And then we're just going to save the user in the database. And also, well, before we save them in the database, we need to disable them. So we're going to say users.set enable. We're going to set that to false, just in case that this was true, because we know that when we're saving a new user, they have to be disabled. So we're going to disable them, save them. So now the user is saved. Next, we need to create a confirmation for them so that we can give them a token. So here is where we're going to call the confirmation repository that, well, actually before we call the repository, we need to create a confirmation. So we're going to say confirmation, we're going to name it confirmation equals a new confirmation. So that's when we're going to be passing in the user for the constructor that we created. So if I go in there, you can see that we're calling this constructor. So we're going to give it the user, and then it's going to set the user for the object that we're creating with this constructor, pass in the date as of right now, and then create this random token, which we're going to save all of this and the confirmation table also with the user ID, which is this foreign key. Okay, so hopefully this is gonna make sense, and we're gonna take a look at the database to see what that looks like from a database perspective. So let's close this off. Now we have this new confirmation. What we're going to do is we're gonna save it. So we're gonna say confirmation.save and then pass in the new confirmation. So at this point, we need to send the token to the user, to their email, right? So we have all the information we need. We have the user email, as you can see here, and then we have the confirmation on which the token exists. So if I do that, get token, so you can see that the token exists. Okay, so we need to send that token to the user. So now what we're going to do is start working on the email. So here I'm going to put a simple to do. So I'm going to say to do, and then we're going to say send email to user with token. Okay, so that's what we need to do here. I'm going to put that in a comment. Oops, just like that. Okay, so that's going to be what we will need to do at this point before we return. And then after we return, we can just return the user. So we pass in the user, put another space here. So we have to send the email at this point. Okay, so we save the user, well, we disable them, and then we save them. We create a new confirmation for that user by passing in this user into the constructor. We save the confirmation. And then now we need to send the email to the user to their email address that we have access to here, and then send them the token to their email address. So that's all we have to do for the save. We don't have anything we can do with the email yet. So we're going to do this once we're done with the user service implementation. So now what we're going to do with the verify token. So say they access their email and then they send another request with their token, and we need to verify this token. So that's what we're going to be doing right now. So let's go ahead and work on that. We're gonna do the confirmation. So we're gonna say confirmation. We're gonna get a new confirmation, and we're gonna call the confirmation repository that find by token, and then we're gonna pass in the token. Okay, so we get the token that the user is gonna send to verify their new email or their account. So we got the token. We send that token to the database to fetch an entire confirmation by that token. And then what we can do is to find the user that is associated with this confirmation. So we're going to say user, which is going to be the user. We're going to set it equal to the user repository that, and then we're going to call find by email, ignore case. And then we're going to say from the confirmation that we got, we're going to get the user. So we're going to say get user that get email. Okay. So we're going to find the user this confirmation is associated with. And then now we can do user that set enable. We're going to set this to true. So we're going to enable the user, and then we're going to say user repository that save, because we changed something on the user. We have to save the user again. So now the user is enabled in our application or in the database. If you want to, you can do something like confirmation repository that delete, and then you pass in, you pass in the confirmation. So here you can say just delete that particular confirmation. but that's up to you. Depends on how you want to do that. I don't need to delete the confirmation, but the logic in this case doesn't really matter. I just want to have something that I can work with so that we can send emails, and then we're gonna return true. Okay. Also, you can check to see if the user is null. Like this can return null if we didn't find a new user. So you can put more checks in here just to make sure that your logic is very robust. But again, doesn't really matter for us. We're just doing this so that we can put some context around sending an email. But this is going to be the core of the course. Okay, so that part right here, where we're going to be sending the email. So we got our user, we enable them, we save them in the database, and then we return true. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna work on some endpoints, because we need to expose some endpoints so that we can allow requests to come in, and then we can call these methods and then try to save the user and things like that. So let's go ahead and work on that right now. I'm gonna go ahead and close this off and create another package here, and I'm just gonna name it resource. I've had a lot of questions for this, why I'm naming this resource and not controller. Again, the answer is it doesn't really matter. You can name this whatever you like. I just know that for REST API, they like to name this resource. So I just like to name mine resource, but you can name it controller or REST controller or user REST controller. It doesn't really matter. So I'm gonna name this user resource, and it's going to be the class, and we want to add some annotation here. So the first one is going to be the REST controller. So we're gonna say REST controller, and then I'm gonna pass in add request mapping. So we're gonna say request mapping. I'm gonna give it we can do something like /API/users, and then I'm gonna pass in the required our constructor, because we're gonna be doing a dependency injection again. Okay, so in here we need the private final user service. We're gonna name it user service. So we have the user service, so we can call the save user and the verify token inside of this controller / resource. So I'm gonna have a post mapping. So we're gonna say post mapping, and this is gonna be public. It's gonna be returning a response entity of type unknown for now. So I'm gonna put a question mark, and then we're gonna call it create user or create a new account or something like that, or register a new user. And then we're gonna pass in the request body, which is gonna be the user, and then we're just gonna save the user. So another thing that I want to do is to return a particular response, which is something that I like to do. Obviously you can like return a simple string if you would like, or you can return whatever you prefer, right? But in my case, I'm gonna go ahead and return a particular object. If you've seen any of my tutorials or my courses, you've probably seen this before, but let's quickly take care of this because I like to have it. So let's right click here, go to class, and then I'm gonna name it HTTP response. And then let's do right click protected string timestamp. We're gonna do another protected for the status code, and then let's do another one for the HTTP status from Spring. So we're gonna name this status, and then protected, another string for a message, and then we can do another one for, I like to do a developer message. So we're gonna do developer message. I know I learned this somewhere, I just can't remember where, and I just kind of like it. And then we can have another string for the path, like the path that the request was initiated on. And then we can even have something like, oops, protected, another string request method, like if you want to send that back as well. And then the most important one is a map of anything, which I'm gonna call data. And we need some placeholders in here, so question mark, and then question, oops. And then let's go ahead and import this map from util. And then in here, I'm gonna pass in at data, also the super builder. In this case, the super builder is really important. And then another cool one is JSON include. So unless something is not their default value, we're not gonna include it. So we're gonna say non or not null if you prefer. I just like non-default. So this is what we're gonna return. So we can copy this and then we can pass it in here. Instead of a string, this is the guy. And let's go ahead and import that. Okay, so obviously this method is gonna be pretty simple. If this was like a real application where we wanted to actually create a real user and stuff like that, you would have a lot of validation on this method, like to make sure that you're receiving good data from the user. But that's not the case in our situation. So we're just gonna get a new user here. and then set them equal to the user service that save user, and then pass in that user. So it's pretty simple. And after that, we're just gonna go ahead and return a response entity. So we're gonna say response entity that created, because that's a tool one, and then we can call the URI that create, because that takes a URI, like the location of the newly created resource or user in this case. And then we can pass in the body. So we're gonna say body and put the semicolon here. So in the body, we're gonna pass in our response. So we're gonna say HTTP response that builder, and then we're gonna pass in the timestamp. We're gonna call now or local datetime. So local datetime dot now dot toString, and then I'm gonna scroll up a little more. And then after that, we can pass in the data. In this case, that's going to be a map of the user. So here we're going to pass in a string, a user, which is going to be the user. Well, the new user in this case. So new user. And then we can pass in the message. We can say user created. And then let's pass in the status. We're going to pass in created. And then we can pass in lastly the status code. Status code created that value, lowercase value. That's gonna give us the actual status code, like the number. Okay, and then lastly, we're gonna call build. That's gonna be our methods. Let's import this map from util, and I'm gonna do Control-Alt-L to format this a little. Well, that did nothing, but in any case, so this is gonna be the method to create a new user. Like I mentioned, you would probably have like a user DTO request instead of the actual user in your domain that you're saving in your database, but that's something you can do. We're gonna save the user, which is where the sending of the email is gonna happen. And then we're gonna return this nice response in the response body. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is to create just the second method to verify the token. So let's go ahead and work on that right now. I'm gonna go ahead and copy this first method and then go down, paste it. This is gonna be a get mapping. So we're gonna change this to a get mapping, and this is gonna be, let's name it confirm user account, or new user account, whatever you want to call it. And then we're going to pass in the request parameter. So we're going to say request param, and this is going to be the token. So we're going to be looking for the token as a request parameter, and we're going to translate this into a string, or string is going to do the translation for us. And then that's going to be the token. So we have access to the token. We're just going to call the verify token. We named it. Yep, verify token. We pass in the token, and it's gonna return a boolean. So I'm gonna get rid of that, and we can do something like that, var, and we're gonna say is success or something as the name of the variable, and then we're gonna pass it in here. So we can pass in the key here as Control Z as success, and then we can pass in this boolean is success like that, and then we can change that to account verified, passing on OK here, and then passing the status as the 200. We're gonna name this to the OK, and then get rid of this URI because we don't need it, and then import this get mapping import. So that should be everything we need to do for the confirmation of the user account by passing in the token. So now we have everything we need to give this some sense, right? So we have users coming in, they're signing up, and they're gonna pass in their email and their name. We're gonna call the save user, and if I do Control-Alt-B, I'll go to the implementation for this, and then we're gonna check to see if the user already exists. If the user already exists, meaning the email is already in our database, we're gonna throw an exception, and otherwise we're gonna set their enable to false, and then we're gonna save the user in a database. Once the user is saved in a database, we're gonna go ahead and create a new confirmation for them, and then save that confirmation with the user information, and then send the email, and then return that particular user. In the case that they send the token, like after they open the email and click on the link that we're gonna send them, then we're gonna get the token as a request parameter. We're gonna verify that token, which will end up over here. And all we're gonna do is try to find a confirmation by this token, get the user by that confirmation, set their enable to true, and then save that user in the database. So that way the user is now enabled. Let's say we were using this enable to check whether or not they can access our app. If this is false, then they can't. If this is true, then they can. So that's when we would make that change. We save the user back in the database because we just made a change to the user, and then we return true. All other logic is really up to you, but that's all I'm gonna have for this because I'm only using this to give some context around sending the email to the user. Okay, and you can take this application as well, and then you can build upon it, and you will have all the code to create a new user and verify their token, and you can add whatever you want to add here as far as logic is concerned. So what we're gonna do next is to just put in some database configuration, because if we try to run the application right now, it's gonna fail because we have the well, we have to go to the pump file. So we have this SQL dependency, so it's gonna try to find a data source bean, and we don't have any data source bean. So we're gonna have to make sure that we have the configuration for that so that the application doesn't fail. And then we're gonna run the app and make sure that our domains are being created in the database. So the user and the confirmation, and then we can hit postman and then see if we can send a request to hit one of these endpoints, just to make sure that the application is working as expected. And then we're gonna start working on sending this email. Okay, so we're gonna send multiple different types of email like I showed you in the introduction. We're gonna start with a simple text email, and then we're gonna gradually increase the complexity of the emails that we're sending. So let's go ahead and put in a data source configuration, and then we're gonna run the app to make sure that it's working as expected. I'm gonna go ahead again and close everything, and we're gonna go back to the configuration. So inside of this resource, I'm gonna rename this to a YAML file. So change that property to YML, and I'm just gonna paste in the configuration. So I'm gonna paste it, and we're gonna look through it. So you can see that I'm setting in a Spring profile. Obviously we don't need a Spring profile, but this is code that I have sitting around in other projects that I'm working on. So just to give you a sense of what a good configuration would look like. And I don't think that I've ever shown this before, but I'm gonna show you now. And that's one way that you can make Spring configuration very decoupled. Unless you're using a microservice architecture, then you have an entire application, which is a configuration application. But for our purpose, we're going to be using a very decoupled configuration for this app. It's overkill for what we're trying to do, but you know, it's better you know it than you don't. So you can see that I'm setting a profile. Now, a cool thing you can do when you're using a separate configuration file and you're bringing in these values or these variables is that you can set default. As you can see here, I'm passing this :dev. So by default, if Spring is going to read this and it can't find it, or it's null or something, then it's going to use the dev as the default. And you can do that with all of these variables. And then I'm defining the data source using Postgre, JDBC. So relational database, and then passing the host, the port, and also the database name, passing the username and the password, and then all this other stuff is for JPA. So generate DDL, show the SQL logs. We're gonna update our tables every time we run, and then passing in some time zone stuff and the dialect and format the SQL. So pretty standard stuff if you've been working with Spring Boot. That's nothing new. You should be familiar with this configuration. If you were to deploy this application in AWS, you can set these as environment variables. So you define these as environment variables and Spring would pick them up. But what we're going to do is to define different types of environment within our local configuration. So I'm going to right click on the resource and then do a new file, and I'm going to call this application-dev.yaml. So this is going to be the dev profile. That's why I'm naming it -dev. This is also a convention in Spring. So I have application-dev. So that means that's the dev configuration file. And then I'm going to press enter, and then I'm going to pass in these values. Okay, so this is for the database, and this is for my server. I don't think I'm using the server port, but we're gonna plug it in a minute. So I have the Postgre as my username, and the password is let me in, super secure password. And this is the computer where my instance of Postgre is running, and then the port, and then SP Cloud is the name of my database. I don't know why I named this SP Cloud. I don't even know what it stands for. I'm pretty sure I had a good reason when I did it, but I don't remember why I named this database SP Cloud. But in any case, and then since we're inside of this dev application file, then we set the active profile to be the dev. Okay, so we're matching the name of the file with the active profile as part of the variable that we're passing in to the main configuration file. Okay, so it will replace this active profile right here, which is already having the default as. So the cool thing with this is that you can also, let's say I can just copy this and paste it, and then I can say, for example, test. And then in here, I can just change this to test. And then I can pass in the test configuration values for these. And if you want, you can paste it one more time. So, oops, I'm gonna click on this resource and then paste. So here I can say something like prod. So if I had like a prod environment, then I would change this to, and I would pass these values. Obviously, I mean, you wouldn't pass these values in the clear like this, but there could be other configuration, or there would be other configurations that you would pass in. In prod, your database information is passed in at runtime. If your application is being deployed in AWS, you can use Secret Manager or whatever the case then, but you probably not gonna pass your credentials or for your database to the application like that. But you can see the benefits of having this type of configuration. Another thing you can do is you can go inside of this configuration, so the one that we're using to run the application inside IntelliJ, and you can set these values as well. So you can see active profile, I can pass in dev, or I can pass in tests, and it will pick the appropriate configuration file. And as you can see here, so if I set this to test, for example, click apply, click OK. Now when I run the app, it will pick up this dev. This is just for running it in IntelliJ. Now if I would also do it in the terminal, I'm gonna pick git bash instead because I'm on Windows. I don't want to use the Windows command line. I could say mvn spring boot run, whatever I think it's spring dash boot, and then run. And then I could also pass the active profile. And the way you would do this is by passing in -d, I think it's spring, you do spring that profiles that active equal, and then you can do prod, whatever the case, or you can do dev. So it's very flexible in terms of which configuration that you want to be picked up whenever the application is starting. So really good for development when you have to develop your application when you're local and you can only use a dev environment or a test environment. So very, very flexible. In real world, that's how configurations are defined. All these values are being passed in as environment variable. And you can also even define these in your server. So on the computer where the application is going to be running, you can define these as environment variable on the operating system. So really, really flexible stuff that you can do when you have your configuration defined like this. All right, so I think that's everything we need. So obviously we just have the same information in these, but it would be up to you to change this information. So I'm gonna close the prod and everything else. And if we go inside of the dev, this is the configuration that I need. And by default, I'm gonna be using the dev. So I don't even have to do this right here. I can just delete it, click apply, and then click OK. So when I run the app, well, this is defined inside of the dev. So it's gonna pick this file anyway. And the last thing I need to do is to use this port. So let's go into the main configuration and then go to the bottom here. And then we're gonna do server port. And then we're gonna pass in these values. So we're gonna do $ open curly braces server _ port. You can see that Spring can see these values because it has support for it. Also, another thing that would be different is the port. The port would probably be different for prod. Let's say prod would be 8080. Let's say prod could be like 8080 or something, like, because you would probably have a different port for a different environment, and then maybe that would be like 7000, and then all these would be different. But anyways, you get the all right. So for dev, we're gonna be running on 9000, and I'm gonna close this. So that's gonna be picked up here. I'm gonna put a space. Otherwise, we can just stick with the old 8080. But since this is gonna be resolved to a value, then it's gonna use the value instead of 80. Okay, so hopefully this was a good configuration for you. And what we're gonna do next is to just run the application. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's click on this green play button and let's just give this application a second to come up here. So we should see some logs that is creating the table. Okay, there we go. So you can see everything was really fast. So let's scroll up a little. So it creates the confirmation and then it creates the users table. So we have users and then confirmations, and then it altered the confirmation table and add the constraint. Okay, so you can see here, add this unique constraint of the user ID on the confirmation table. And before it did that, it checked to see if the constraint already exists. So you can see here, it's gonna use this name for the unique key, and it checks to see if there is already an existing constraint by that name. And then you can see where it adds the foreign key constraint in this log. And then the application started on 9000, which is the port that we're passing in right here. Okay, so everything seems to be working. So let's go ahead and check the database and see what we have. So let's open my database, and this is the PG admin. So the reason you see that I'm using an IP address instead of localhost for all these things is because I have a computer that's like sitting in my room right over there. And then I have Docker running on it. It's got Ubuntu running, and then I have Docker installed. So whenever I need like an instance of MySQL or PostgreSQL or the pgadmin, I just create a quick Docker file and then I just spin up one of these instances or servers and then I just use it. So let's right click and just refresh and we can see the users table. So we can go to properties and we can look at the columns and you can see user ID, email is enabled, the name and the password. So that looks all good. And then we can also look at the confirmation, go to properties, go to columns and you can see the ID, create a date, which is a timestamp, the token, and then the user ID. And if we go to constraint, we should be able to see the confirmation key, which is referring to the, well, that's the primary key, but we want to go to the foreign key here. That's the name of it. And then you can see that it's pointing to the ID on the user's. Okay. You can see that in the reference here. So everything seems to be in shape. So the last thing that I want to do is to try to register a new user, and I'm gonna use Postman to do that. So I'm gonna go ahead and open Postman and open a new request. We want to go to, well, localhost. Well, I've been testing, so Postman is keeping a history of what I've been doing. So we want to go to localhost 9000 and then we want to go to users, and this is gonna be a post request. Go to the request body and we want to select raw JSON, and then we're gonna pass in the JSON in here. So we're gonna need the name, oops. So name of the user, so that's going to be Junior, and then we're gonna pass in the email of the user. So I'm gonna copy this, 1, 2, 3. I think we can pass in the email, and then we're gonna pass in the password. So password, well, the password is not being hashed. That's another thing, but you guys know how to do this using Spring Security. And another thing I wanna show you, even if we pass the enable, so for example, we're gonna say enable, and then we set this to true, we know that before we save, we're gonna set this to false. So even if we were to pass this enable, it would still save the user as enable being false. But I'm gonna keep it here so that you can see that even though we're passing in true here, because we're updating it in the code, then it's gonna be false. And in here, I'm just gonna pass in junior@gmail.com. This is not a real email. We're not really sending an email at this point, so it doesn't really matter. And oops, I need to get rid of this. Okay, and it's a post request. So if we send this request, we should get a success response. So let's go ahead and send it. And you can see a 201 created, user is created, and here's the new user. And you can see the enable is false, even though we're passing in true here because we updated in the code. So now if we go to the database and we go to the user and we want to do refresh, and then I'm gonna click on the tables and then do query tool so that we can open the query tool. And then I'm gonna do select star from the users table. And also we're gonna do the same for the confirmation table. So let's copy this and pass in the confirmation. So we're gonna say confirmations. So if we select everything in the user, we should see that one user in there. We can see the user is in there and is enabled is false. So now if I select everything in confirmation, you can see the ID for this particular entry, the timestamp, the random UUID, and then the user ID. Okay, so you can see the user ID here, 4752. The reason this number is not 1 and it's also the same number is because I've been using this database for the entire testing that I was doing, so that's why it's not 1. And every time we create a new user, we also create a new confirmation, so these numbers are consistent. So you can see the user ID is also 475, but in your case it's probably going to be like 1 or 2 or something, so just keep that in mind. Okay, so at this point everything should come together. So now you understand what we're trying to do, and now we're just gonna go ahead and see if we can send an email to the user once they create a new account with us. So if we go to the service implementation, go to the user service. So right here, we need to send the confirmation with the token. Okay, so this is a good time to take a break. And if you want to use this application, feel free to use it. Obviously, everything we just did, we didn't have to do it. But like I mentioned, we're going to give this some context just to, brush up on your skills a little so that you can understand what we're trying to do. So now we're going to be focusing on this part right here, which is to send the email to the user with the URL and the token in the URL. And I'm going to send you how you can send this email in many different ways. So this is a good time to take a break if you would like, and then come back. But that's what we're going to be working on right now. The email, the sending of the email. So let's work on that right now. I'm going to be using a Gmail account so that I can send the emails, but you should be able to do it with any mail server that you have. So if you have Outlook or Microsoft or whatever other mail server that you're using, you just have to find the credentials, like the information that you want to be able to log in into that server that Spring Boot is going to use. And then you should be able to achieve the same thing. But I'm going to give a Gmail example because, Most people have a Gmail account, but you should be able to follow along as long as you can find the information that is needed for Spring Boot to be able to log into your mail server and then send the email. So let me show you the steps to do for Gmail. So if I go back here, and I have this page open, and I'm gonna zoom in a little more. So what you're gonna need to do, you have to create something called an app password. And these are the steps that you have to follow so that you can do this. So if you go to your Google account, you go under security and then you select two-step verification. I believe you need to have two-step verification set up in order to create an app password. So make sure that you have two-step verification set up, and then you should be able to generate an app password, as you can see here. So these are very simple steps, and maybe most of you already have that. But if you use your password that you use to log into your account, like on a daily basis, then it's not gonna work. You need to have an app password for this to work, okay? So make sure you follow these steps and then create the app password that we're gonna be using in our configuration in Spring Boot, so that Spring Boot can access the Gmail server and then send the email on your behalf. And if you want to see what that looks like, I have my page open. Obviously I'm going to be blurring things here and there, but I just want to show you what that page would look like. So if I go to my Google account, that's what it looks like. And as you can see right now, I'm under security. So I'm right here in step 2. And then I have two-step verification set up. So you can see the green tick. So if I click inside of two-step verification, it's going to take me to this page. And again, I'm seeing personal information on this page, so things are going to be blurred out. And I do apologize for that. So if we go there and check to see what we have to do. So it says at the bottom of the page, we should see the app password. So if we go back here, and then I'm going to scroll to the bottom. So here I am at the bottom, and you can see I have one password. Okay, so you just click here, and then it's going to give you this link to generate a new password. So you would just click that link after you click here. So if I click here, it's going to take me to this page. You can see that I have one already, and then you just have to select the device. So here, it's not a mail, calendar, or YouTube or contact. You just have to say other, and you can say like my app or testing or something, and then you're gonna click generate, and then that would generate a random password. So if I do that, you can see it gives me this password that I then can use in the Spring Boot application to log into my Gmail account. And then I would click on done, and then you can see my app is created here, and I haven't used it, but I don't need this second one. I'm using my web app, so I'm gonna delete this one. So it's deleted. I'm only using this one, my web app. So make sure you follow these steps so that you can generate the password, and then you should be good to go. So I'm gonna go ahead and just close this out. And then now what we're gonna do is we're gonna go to our configuration. So we're gonna go to the dev configuration, and then we're gonna put the configuration or the values that we need to pass in for the email server. And then we're gonna plug these values in inside of the main application property file, which is the application.yaml. So let's go ahead and do that right now. So I'm gonna get down here and let me close this. And what we want to do is, well, I'm gonna add a, let's say, email config, and under there I'm going to create some custom properties, which is what we've been doing. So here I'm going to say email underscore host, and then we're going to set this equal to the Gmail server, so smtp.gmail.com, and then we want the email, and then we want the port, and I think for Gmail it's 587, and then we're gonna do email underscore ID. So that's the email address, like your actual email address, like john123@gmail.com. So this is gonna be, let's do your email address. You can name it email address. In this case, I'm just naming it email ID, but it doesn't really matter. And then here I'm gonna have the email underscore password. So that's gonna be your app password. Okay, so whatever we just talked about. And then the last one, I'm gonna call it verify underscore email underscore host. Since I already have an email, oops, I would type it here. So since I already have an email host here, I'm just gonna name this the verify email host. And I need this to be http://localhost. And then we're gonna pass in the port. So here we can say $, and then open, we're gonna pass in the server port. So server port, in our case, that would be the 9000 that we have here. So whatever port for whatever environment that we're running on, that's gonna be the port of this host. So obviously this would be your domain name, like your core domain. So you would pass it here, or you can just pass this in at runtime, depending on the environment or if the application is being deployed. So it can really be whatever you want it to be. So now that we have this configuration, you can see they have this underline, like this squiggly underline. That's because they're not being used. So we're gonna go ahead and use these values. And also don't forget to actually pass in your credentials here. So that would be your Gmail account or your Gmail email address. And then that would be the app password, not the password that you use to log in. If you use that password, then it's not gonna work. It's gonna say it couldn't log into your account. It's gonna give you some kind of an error. So make sure you use the app password that we just generated or we just talked about. So your email, like the same email address that you use, and then your app password, and everything else should be the same. And also I can just copy this configuration, and then I can make sure that I have it in all my other environments. So I can go here and then paste it. And then, you know, if I have to change something here to match the prod environment, then I would make that change here. But just so you know that it's gonna go in all of the different environment configuration files. Okay, so that's gonna be in here. And also remember to update everything appropriately. Okay, so we can close these now. And now we're gonna go to the main application file, and then we're gonna pass in these values that we just created. So the configuration for the email, they go under Spring. So I'm gonna collapse some of this stuff here so that you guys can see better. So we're gonna go under Spring. So right here, you know, spacing is very important in a YAML file. And then I'm gonna pass in mail. So in the mail, I want the host, and this is going to be our host. So here we're gonna pass in the email host, and then we're gonna pass in the port. So we're gonna say port, and that's gonna be our port. So email port, you can see it coming up here. And then we need the username. So username, that's gonna be the ID. So the email ID. So that's gonna be email_ID. So that's your email or your username. And then we need the password. So we're gonna say password, and that's going to be the password. We can just grab this here. And I'm gonna pass in a few other things that are quite important. So I'm gonna pass in the default encoding, and then I'm gonna set this to UTF-8. So that's the encoding for the email. And then I'm gonna pass in some other properties. So properties, I'm gonna pass in a bunch of properties. So we want the mail, and then we want to do MIME, and then I'm gonna do char set. Again, I'm gonna set this to UTF. And then under MIME, I'm gonna pass in SMTP, and then I'm gonna pass in write timeout. I'm gonna set this to 10 seconds. So I'm gonna do 10, do 3, so milliseconds. And then I want the connection timeout. You can set this to whatever you prefer, but I'm gonna be sending the email in a separate thread. So I'll give it 10 seconds max to try to establish a connection. And then I'm gonna say timeout, also 10, 1, 2, 3. And this is by experience, because sometimes when I set it to 5, I see that it fails, and then I decided to up it to 10. But that's gonna be up to you. And then the auth, we're gonna set this to true. And then we want the start TLS, because we want transparent layer security. We're gonna set this to, well, we need to enable it. So we're gonna say enable, set this to true, and then we want to say required, because we want secure connection. So we're passing in some properties here. So character set for the MIME type is UTF, SMTP. So that's the protocol. We're setting some properties for it. So the simple mail transfer protocol that this is going to be using to send the emails. We're passing in the write timeout to be 10 seconds, the connection timeout to be 10 seconds, and the overall timeout to be 10 seconds as well. You can look at these properties online and see exactly what they do, but most of them are self-explanatory, so they should be easy to understand. And then we're enabling auth, and then we want the transparent layer security to be enabled, and also it's required. And then under property, I'm gonna pass in the verify. So I'm gonna say verify. This is a custom property, and then I'm gonna say host, and then I'm gonna pass in the host. So we're gonna say verify email host. Okay, so this is a custom one that is not part of these properties here, but you can add whatever you like and just use it in your application with no problem. So you can put it in any bean and it should be picked up. And I'm gonna show you how we're gonna use this. Okay, so that should be everything that we need for the email configuration. You can also do this using a Java class, which is pretty simple, but this is, at least in my opinion, a better way to do it. Well, in the Java class, you can also pass in properties like we have here, but I prefer to do it in a properties file, but it's really up to you. But you can do the same thing in the Java class. You just create a simple configuration class, and you can use the, I think it's called the Java mail implementation or something like that, and then you can pass in the same configuration like the host, the port, the ID, the password, etc. So that's all the configuration that we're gonna need for the email. Now we're gonna go ahead and make use of them and then connect to the Google email server and then see if we can send an email. I'm gonna go ahead and close everything here, and we're gonna go back to the service. So inside of the service folder, I'm gonna create another service. So this is gonna be the email service. So email service, and well, this is a class. I want it to be an interface, so we're gonna change this to interface. Okay, so inside of this email service, I'm gonna define all the different methods that I need to send email. So they're gonna return void, and I'm gonna say send simple mail message, and this is gonna take a string, the name, so like the name of the first name of the user, another string that's gonna be the to, like who we're sending it to, and then we want the token as well, so we're gonna say token. So the token is gonna be the token that we're gonna send with the email so that the user can click on and then enable or confirm their new account. And then I'm gonna copy this and then paste it down 5 times. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I'm gonna change the name. So I'm gonna change this to send mime message with attachment. Okay, so I'm gonna show you how to send message with attachment. And then we're gonna change this to maybe send mime message with embedded. So we're gonna use the my message helper so that we can send the my message, and then we pass in some embedded file or something like that. I mean, you can come up with a better name for this. And then this next one is going to be almost the same. So let's copy this and then paste it here, and let's pass in files. I can change this to embedded images, because a lot of times when you pass in embedded images, they work just fine because they're like inside of the email body. But if you pass in some files, depending on the file type, it might be hard for your email client to display it properly. But if it's an image, then they can display it properly. So that's why I'm having one to send my message with embedded images, and then I have another one to send my message with embedded files. So you'll see the difference with the two. And then this one is going to be send HTML email. So that's why we're gonna send a simple HTML email. And then the last one is gonna be send HTML emails with embedded files. Okay, because inside of the HTML emails themselves, you can put pictures or other files and things like that. So I'm gonna show you how to do that as well. So I'm just trying to cover as many scenarios as possible. And then I'm gonna show you the same, but this time not with images, but with files. And then I'm gonna show you how to send HTML emails, like these rich emails that you get from your retailers, stores, or something like that, where they have like images, like it looks like a web page. So that's an HTML email. It's really just an email, but in an HTML format. And then I'm gonna show you how to put files or attachments or embedded files inside of these HTML emails as well. So we're just gonna try to cover as many scenarios as possible. So now we're gonna give an implementation to this interface, and then we're gonna start working on each one of these methods. So let's go ahead and do that right now. Let's go over to the implementation folder. So this folder right here, and we're gonna do email service impl for implementation. And then we want to implement the email service. And then we're gonna give an implementation for all of these methods. So select OK. All right, so the first thing that we're gonna need is the mail sender. So I'm gonna say private final Java mail sender, and then I'm gonna name it email sender. So this is the guy that's gonna send the email on our behalf. And then here, I'm gonna pass in the service annotation, and also pass in the required args constructor so that we can do the dependency injection in the constructor. A couple other things that we're gonna need. We need the host. So we're gonna say private string host. And also we need the from email, like the email ID that we're using. So private string, and this is gonna be from email. And this is supposed to be string. And I'm gonna use the add value annotation to plug those in whenever this bean is created. So I'm gonna do quotes and then $ open, and we want to go to spring.mail.verify.host. So that's the name that we gave the host. And then I'm gonna copy this and paste it on the from email. This time we need the username, so I'm gonna change this to username. So the username is like the email ID, like your email address. In this case, that's gonna be the from email that we're going to be using here. So at this point, we have almost everything that we need inside of this class so that we can start implementing all of these methods. Obviously, we don't need all of them, but every time we're going to use one and then register a new user, and then you're going to see what the email looks like. So you can take this app and then just take the entire code. You can put it on your whatever application you have, whatever the complexity, and then make small modification to it, and then just use one of these depending on your use case. So if you want something with embedded files or HTML email, whatever the case, then you can just grab one of those and use one of them, or use all of them. It's up to you depending on your application. So now what we're gonna do is to try to send the simple mail message. So this is gonna be pretty simple. So let's do that right now. So I'm gonna do try, and I'm gonna do a try catch black actually. So try, and then we're gonna do catch any exception. So I'm gonna do exception, and then if we have any exception, we can just do a sysout and then log it. So let's go down here and then put this on a new line. So I'm gonna do a sysout and then just do exception that get message, because we're not really doing any proper exception handling in this case. And then we can just throw an exception. So throw new runtime exception, and then we can pass in the exception that get message. So for our exception, we're not really doing anything. We're just printing it on the console and then throw the exception, which is gonna also print on the console, but doesn't hurt. So now we're gonna pass in the message. So we're gonna say simple, it's supposed to be uppercase. So simple mail message. That's gonna be the message, and then we're gonna set it equal to a new simple mail message, and then we're gonna say this message that sets subject. So the subject of the email, we're gonna set this to maybe something like new user account verification, something like that. So let's make a constant out of that so that we can use it in other places. So introduce constant, new user account verification, that looks fine to me. And then we want to set the from, so message that set from, that's going to be the from email, the one that we're grabbing from the properties file. And then we're going to pass in the message that to, so set to. So who we want to send the message to, that's going to be the to, so whatever email address that we get here. And then we're going to set the actual email itself, so the message of the email, so that's set text. So this takes a simple text message. So we can say something like, hey, this is working, ha ha ha. So that's just for test. And then after that, we're going to pass in this token and send everything properly, but we're just going to do a quick test. And then lastly, we want to send this. So that's what we call the email sender that send. And then we're going to send that message. So pretty standard stuff, very simple. Well, the simple mail message is supposed to be simple, so you can see it's very straightforward. It's very good when you want to send a quick text email, but if you want more options, you might want to use something like the My Message and the My Message helper. And I'm going to show you these as well. So this is going to be the first example. We're just going to send a simple mail message. So what we're going to be doing is to test this out and make sure that we can at least send an initial email just to make sure that things are working. So don't forget to update your application-dev.yaml file. I'm not going to open it right now because I have my credentials in there, but remember to change this and then add your password and email in there. Otherwise, obviously you will get a failure. And then I'm going to go inside of the user service implementation, and then I'm going to scroll up a little more, and then I'm going to pass in the private final email service. Gonna name it email service. Now we can use that email service and call that one method that we have the implementation for, which is just a simple mail message. So let's go down. So after we save the confirmation, we can pass this information in. So we're gonna call the email service that sends simple email. So that one at the bottom here, since this is the only one we have an implementation for. And then we're gonna pass in the name of the user. So we're gonna say user that get name. We need to pass in the to, which is the email address or the to email. So that's the user that get email, and then the token. The token is under confirmation that get token. It's pretty simple. We're not using this token right now. We're not using the name of the user, but that shouldn't hurt anything. So if we start right now, we should be able to send an email to this user's email, which means that we're gonna need to pass in a real email to that user whenever we're creating a new account, or supposedly creating a new account, since we're just doing this for testing. So let's go ahead and take that for a swirl. So I'm gonna go ahead and run the application first. So let's click on this green play button and just give it a second to start. It's gonna come up here in just a second. Okay, there we go. So the first thing is we wanna make sure that everything starts properly, like we don't have any errors or anything. Okay, so you can see it started on 9,000. So everything seems to be working properly. So now I'm gonna go ahead and open Postman. And then we want to go to the request body, and this is what I was using. This is not a real email, so I'm gonna go and pass in the get arrays. So this is the email that you can use to send me an email if you have questions. So that's a real email. So make sure you put a real email in there. Otherwise you won't get an email. So you need a real email at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and send this request now and let's see what happens. So let's give it a second. So this is going to take a little longer because it's going to take more time to send the email, and we're going to fix this in just a second. But initially I just want to test it so that you can see what's going on. So you see that it's taking some time, well, taking too much time. And then finally we get the 200OK that the user was created. So we get our email, our enable is false, and then we get a 201. So the user was created. So now we can check the database to make sure that the user is actually inside of the database, and also check our email to make sure that we did receive the email. So I'm going to go back to my Gmail. And again, if you see things are blurred, that's because I have students sending me questions and things like that. So I'm just guarding their privacy. And you can see the first email that I have is new user account verification, and you say, hey, this is working, ha ha ha. So we can already see that this is working, and I'm gonna go ahead and click open it. And you can see here's our email, which is just a simple text. Hey, this is working, ha ha ha. All right, so we know that this is working. So now what we're going to do is to make sure that we can send the link to the user so that they can click it with their token and then verify their new account. So let's just delete this message and then go back to the application. Well, we need to go back to the app, and I'm gonna minimize this and then go back to the email service implementation. So we need to make use of this token and then generate the URL that we need to send with that email so that the user can just click on it and then they can verify their. So let's go ahead and do that right now. I'm gonna go ahead and create another package. So let's do util. So new package, and I'm gonna name it utils. And then I'm gonna create a email util. You can name it message utils or something like that. So email utils. And here I'm gonna have two methods. So the first one is going to be public and static. It's gonna return a string, and I'm gonna call it get email message, because I don't want to do all this string manipulation inside of the email service implementation. So the first string is going to be the name, the second string is going to be the host, and the third one is going to be the token. So we're going to get the token, the host, and the name, and then we're going to see if we can create that email message. So that's going to return a string. So we're going to say hello. Let me close this for more space. So hello, and then we're going to pass in the name. We can use a string builder to do this, which is going to be a little bit more performant, but this is just one line, so it shouldn't really hurt anything. So we're going to say hello and then pass in the name of the user. So we're going to say, hello. And then we're going to pass in two new lines. So I'm going to do \n twice. And then I'm going to say your new account has been created. Please click the link below to verify your account. And then I'm going to pass in again two more new lines. So \n, and we need to pass in this URL now. So let's create another get verification URL. So that's going to be another method. We're going to give it the host, and we're going to give it the token, and then close this off with a semicolon. So now let's create this method. So create method, also going to return a string. So all we're gonna do is concatenate the host. So we're gonna say return the host. We're gonna add in the, we have to go to /API/users and a question mark token equal, and then we're gonna pass in the token. So we're gonna say plus the token, just like that. So that's gonna give us the URL that we have to send to the user so that they can click on it and then confirm their new account. And then if we want, we can say something like, we can put some more new lines. So we're gonna say two new lines. Well, we need \n and then \n, and then we're gonna say the support team. Okay, and we can put that on a new line. I'm gonna do Control Alt L. Okay, so it didn't reformat that, so I'm gonna just drop this on a new line. Okay, so the get email message is going to be hello, whatever the name of the user is. We can probably put a comma. So after the name, we're gonna put a comma and then do 2 new lines, and then we're gonna say your new account has been created. Please click the link below to verify your account. We put 2 new blank line. We put the URL. This is going to give us the URL. And then we put 2 new blank line, and then we say the support team. So now we can use this email util and then call this method, pass this information, and then it should give us the string that we need for the message. So inside of the user email service implementation, well, we need to go here. Instead of this text that we're passing in here, we're going to say get email util, and then we're going to say get message, and then we need to pass in the name, the host, and the token. Okay, so that's gonna give us the message that we need to pass in as the text message. And then let me just import this statically and do Control Alt O. All right, so we should be good to go now. We should be able to see the URL that the user needs to click on, and then they should be able to verify their account once they click on that URL. So let's go ahead and take that for a test. So I'm gonna rerun the application, and I'm gonna go back to the database, and I'm gonna select all the users. Let me send S here. Select. So we should see the 2 users that we have used so far, and we should have 2 confirmations for them as well. You can see it here. So I'm just gonna go ahead and delete this information. So I'm gonna say delete from users where true, and I'm gonna delete all the users. I'm gonna do the same for the confirmation. So if we try to delete the users table, the information in the users table, it's gonna give us an error because of the foreign key reference. So we need to delete from the confirmation first and then delete the users. Okay, so now we shouldn't have any users. You can see no users, also no confirmation because we delete. Okay, so let's go back to the application. So we're up and running, so that looks good. We're gonna try Postman one more time. So let's open up Postman, and we're gonna send this email one more time just so that we can see what the new message looks like. So let's just give this a second. I'm gonna fix this right after this one test because this is taking too long. I'm just gonna make sure that the sending of the email is done in the new thread. Okay, so it looks like we were good. So 201 created and the email should have been sent. So if we go back to the app, we shouldn't have any errors. Okay, so everything looks good. Let's check the database. So let's open that up real quick and select all the users. That one user is entered and their confirmation should be in there as well. So if we select, you can see their confirmation is in there. And you can see I have 1 email. So let's go in there and let's look at that email. So you can see this email is much better. We have hello Junior, your new account has been created. I'm gonna zoom in a little more. And then it says click on the link to verify your account. Here's the link and then the support team. So that looks perfect, right? So if I click on this link now, you can see account verified. So we were able to verify our account by just clicking on the link that we got from this email. So this is one way that you can send emails, simple text message email or text emails. And a lot of times this is just all you need because you can see you can make this look more professional, you know, by just changing the verbiage of the message or something like that. But that should be everything you need. I mean, there's like government website that when you're using them and you need to confirm your email or something like that, they send emails that looks exactly like this. So this is a lot of times enough for a lot of application because they just need to click on that link and then you're gonna just do whatever you need to do with this token, and then they can just confirm their account or whatever the case might. And you can see that this token that we have here should be the same that we have in a database. So it should be this token, right? So that's why we were able to get this success response and then verify the account of the user. Otherwise it would give us an error. Okay, so you can see that this is working. This looks really nice. And that's all we're gonna have to do for the simple mail message because we're just sending simple text in the email. So this is working just fine, and I'm gonna go ahead and close this and also delete this email and then go back to the application. Okay, so the first one is completed. Obviously you can do more error handlings and things like that, but that should be all we have to do. And now I want to make sure that this runs in a separate thread every single time. So let's go to the main application file. So this file right here, and then I'm gonna enable async. So we're gonna say enable async. Okay, so we're gonna enable async in the entire application, and then we're gonna go back to the email service implementation, and then we're gonna add the add async annotation. So we're gonna say async. So every time these methods will run in a separate thread. So let's paste this down here. We're just gonna do it for all of them so that we don't have to wait that long. You notice when we create the no account, it takes a lot of time for the response to get back to us, but we don't want that to happen. So now all of these methods, they're gonna run in a separate thread. So let's rerun, and then we're gonna do one last test. So let's go back to the database and let's just delete everything again. So delete all the confirmation, delete all the users. Okay, and I already deleted the email. So let's go back, make sure we're up and running. Okay, so we're up and running, back to Postman. You will see that it's significantly faster because once it gets to this method, then it's going to dedicate a separate thread for it to run, and then it's going to return the response to us in the main thread, or the thread that was created with this request. So if you watch this, you can see that I'm going to click send, and you can see we get the response almost instantaneously. Okay, so we don't have to wait for the whole sending of the email to be over and then get the response. This is the typical behavior you would have whenever you're sending emails anyway, because you don't want to send it in the same thread and then have the user. All right, so now if we go back in the app, you can see we have no errors, everything works fine, and we can check the database. So let's go back to the database, select all the users. Our user is in there, their confirmation should be in there as well, and we see that we have our one email. So if I open this again, we get our email. So that's all we're gonna do for the simple mail message. So this method right here. So this one is completed. The next one we're gonna be working on is the one that we have down here, where we're gonna pass an attachment to this email. So that's the one that we're gonna be working on right now. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm gonna copy everything that I have here and then scroll down, and let me just collapse these because we're not gonna be working on them right now, and we're gonna paste everything in there. So I'm gonna paste. So this time, instead of using a simple mail message, we're gonna use a different type of message. We're gonna use one called a mime message. So you can see it coming up here. So the mime message, or not mime mail message, just the mime message. Gonna import that. Okay, so we have the mime message. So it's gonna be the message, and I'm just gonna create another method. So I'm gonna say get mime message. It's not going to take any parameters because I'm going to be using this mime message multiple times. So let's just create the method. So this is going to be pretty simple. All it's going to do, it's going to return the email sender that create mime message. Okay, so that's going to give us the mime message that we need to work on with that email sender. And then I'm going to cut this off and put it at the bottom right, and collapse this. I don't need to collapse and I'm just going to collapse the annotations. Just make sure that we're only focusing on what we work. So with the mail sender, we can create a mime message, and that's what we're doing here. And we're gonna have this mime message. Gonna go back up, collapse these again, and then scroll here. Okay, and now we're gonna need the mime message helper. So here we're gonna say mime message helper, that one. We're just gonna name it helper, and then set it equal to a new mime message helper, and this one is gonna take the message, so the mime message, and it takes also the multi-part, because we're going to be passing in files. So we're going to pass in true. So you can see multi-part true. And also we can pass in the encoding. So in this case, we're going to pass in UTF-8. So we're going to say UTF-8 for our encoding. And that's all we have to do for the message help. I'm also going to turn this into a constant. So introduce constant. So UTF-8 underscore encoding. Just like that. Okay. So UTF-8 encoding, we're gonna have multi-part, which means we're gonna have files in this message and also defining our helper. So that's how we define our helper. Now the helper has more options than just the simple mail message that we were using in this method. So for example, one thing that I can do is I can pass in the priority of the email. So if I paste this in there, and I can say set priority, and I think it's from 1 to 3 or something. So if it's 1, then it's very high priority, and you can go in there as well, and it's just gonna set this header for you. So the X priority, which is an email header, and if you have that, then the email is gonna be marked as important or something, and depending on the email client that you're using, then it might show a little bit of a red text, or make sure that it doesn't end up in your spam folder or something like that. So you can go inside of this helper, or just look at all of these setter methods or other methods that you can use. So you should be able to see all of them. And then we're gonna pass this helper now for the set subject. So the helper can also take the set subject, also pass in the helper for the set from, the set to, and also the set text. Okay, so now we're working mostly with the helper, and they also share the same method. So you saw that the message also has some of the same method. So if I go in there and scroll down a little more, well, it's a big class. Maybe that's not a good idea, but if I do, for example, message and I do dot, you can see if I do set, you can see set from. So they share some of the same methods, but we're gonna be sticking with the helper because that's what we're using. So we set the priority, we set the subject, we set the from email, we set the to email, and then we set the message text itself. So before we can send this actual message, we can pass in the attachments that we want. So here I'm gonna say add attachment. Okay, so we're gonna be adding the attachment from this point on, and I have too many D's in here. Okay, so here what we can do is we can do something called a file system resource. So file system resource, and make sure that this is coming from spring.core.io, and this is going to be well, let me show you the pictures that I have on my system. So I'm gonna open the pictures that I'm gonna be using. So you can see I'm inside of my downloads, and I have a new folder called images, and then I have this first image. So this is an image of a fort that is in my hometown and the country where I was born, and this fort is on top of a mountain. So as you can see here, it's a beautiful fort. And the second picture that I have is a dog. So look at this beautiful fella. So this is the dog. So we're gonna use the fort. So the first picture is the fort and also the dog. So these two pictures. And then also I have a document. So you can see this homework that I have here. I just grabbed some homework that I had sitting on my computer, and then I put it in this folder. So we're going to be attaching these 3 files in the email as attachment. So let's go back to the app. So the first file system resource is going to be the fort. So I'm going to name it fort, set it equal to a new file system resource. And then in here, we need to pass in the new file. So we can say new file. And then we're gonna pass in the path where the file is. So we're gonna say system that get property, and then we want to get the home page of this computer. So user.home, and then after that we can go to the downloads folder. So we're gonna say plus, and then we want to go to /downloads, and then remember inside of the images folder. So let me bring that back up one more time. So I go into my home directory, and then inside of the downloads folder, inside of the images folder, I have the fort.jpg, dog.jpg, and then homework.document or docx. So we're going to use these 3 files. So I'm going to say inside of the images, we want to pass in the fort.jpg. Okay, so that's going to be the first resource. So that's going to be the fort. And then I'm going to do the same for the dog. So the dog and also the homework. So I'm going to change this to dog. So that's the dog. I'm going to rename the variable as well to dog, and also change the homework. So that's going to be the homework, and then change this to homework.docx. Whatever the file extension is, you just put it there. So homework.docx. So that's the homework. So now we just have these 3 files. Now we need to attach them to the email. So the helper gives you a very, very easy method that you can use to pass in this attachment. So we're going to grab that helper and then go back here. Oops. So I'm going to copy that helper, and then we want to go on a new line, and then I'm going to say the helper that add attachment. So you can see they have many different methods. So one takes the file name and the data source. Another one just take the file. So there are many different ways that you can pass in an attachment to this email. So we're going to say pass in the attachment. And then for the file name, I can just get that from the file itself. So I'm going to say fort.get file name, and then I'm going to pass in that fort. So we're going to pass in the file. And then I'm just going to go ahead and just copy this, paste it down 2 times, so 1, 2, and then we're going to pass in the dog. So pass in the dog, and then the dog over here, also pass in the homework. Okay, and we're getting a little squiggly underline here. That's because this might be null, but we can just ignore it. I mean, obviously, if you want to be super sure that this is not null, you can do a simple check. If it's null, then pass in something else, but I'm not worried about it. So we add the files inside of the email as attachment, and then we're going to send that email. So that's all we need to do, and we're pointing to all of our files. So the homework, the dog, and the fort. Now I'm gonna just copy this name and go over to the user service implementation. So we just need another line of this. So I'm just gonna paste this here, copy and paste this, get this name out, and then paste it in here. Okay, and I'm gonna comment this one out because I don't want to send 2 emails. So we're gonna use the send my message with attachment, which is going to call this implementation because it's the only implementation that we have for the service. So at this point, we should be good to go ahead and test this out. So I'm going to just rerun the application, and then I'm going to go back to the database, and I'm going to just delete everyone again. So delete this. I mean, obviously you don't need this to send the email, but we're trying to put this into context. So we have to deal with this user thing here. We don't necessarily have to have this to send an email. All right, so let's go back and make sure we're up and running. Okay, so we're up and running with no problems. So let's go back to Postman, and then I'm going to go ahead and send the request. So everything is successful. So let's go back to the code. Okay, so we don't have any any errors or anything. So now let's go back to the database and look for all the users and look for all the confirmation. Okay, so we can see everything is in here. Now I'm gonna go over to my email, and then I'm just gonna go ahead and refresh here. And you can see here I have the new email, and then I also have the 3 files. You can already see them if you're using a Gmail account. So I'm gonna go ahead and click on that. And as you can see, we have our email. So this is our message. And also we have 3 attachments. You can see the fort, the dog. I can even click on it. I mean, it depends on the email client you're using, but you can see we have the fort here. We also have the dog and also the file. You can preview the file, but I think I have my name, as you can see here at the top left corner of that file. I have my name and my school name and my teacher's name and my school email. So I'm not gonna preview this file, but you can already see it here. So we sent 3 files with this email, and this message at the bottom is because I've been deleting messages coming from this particular email that I'm using. So Gmail is telling me that I have deleted message in this conversation, so you can just delete them forever. Okay, so you can see this is our email. Everything looks good, and you can test this more with different types of file. All files should work, and also this homework that I'm passing in here, it's a very large file. As you can see here, it's 7 megabytes, so it was a very large file. I had to wait a little for the email to come through. So if you're just testing this, just make sure that you're using a smaller file just for testing. But ultimately, your email should come through, and I'm not sure what the limit is, because for emails, I'm assuming you can transfer very, very large files, because, you know, that's something that happens all the time. So I'm not sure. You can just try to Google that and see the limit as far as like how many files or what the megabyte is going to be. And of course, as a user, you can click on the link and everything should work. And this is a weird example. We're sending a link to a user to confirm their account with pictures of dogs and forts and a homework, but you know, you get the idea. So what we're gonna do now is, you can see that these are sent as attachments. So you can see them here, they're attached to this email as attachment. And depending on the client that you're using, you might not see this preview, because this is something that Gmail is doing. So if you're using an Outlook, I think it's going to look a little bit different, or maybe they're just going to be shown as attachment. But what I want to do next is to make sure that I can pass in files, in most cases images, inside of the email body itself. So wherever we're seeing this text at the top here, say that I wanted to embed this image inside of this email like this. Okay, so instead of passing them as attachment, you want to put them within the text of the email itself. And there are many reasons why you might want to do this, because say you just wanted that when they open the email, they can see the pictures that you want them to see, right? And like I said, this preview that we're seeing at the bottom is a Gmail preview. If you have a different email server, it might not show this preview. But what you can also do, like I said, is to embed the images inside of the content of the email itself. So wherever we see the text of the email, we can pass in images, most of the times images, but you can pass in all kinds of files. So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna embed the image inside of the email body itself. So I'm gonna go ahead and delete this, and then I'm gonna go back to the application, and we're gonna scroll up a little more. So this is going to be this one. So send my message with embedded images. So we're pretty much done with this one. So that's going to be the attachment. So what I'm going to do is to just copy this, and then I'm going to just collapse it, because we're pretty much done with this one. Oops. And then I'm going to paste in here. Okay, because it's going to be very similar. And I need an opening here and delete that. Okay, so we're going to be doing almost the same thing with this. And I'm going to do Control-Alt-L just to format this a little, and then also at the last closing. Okay, so now we're going to work on this method so that we can embed the images within the email body itself, and instead of passing them in as attachments as we're doing here. So what we're going to do, I'm going to scroll down a little. Everything else we have in this method is going to be the same. The only change is going to be in the add attachment. There's another one that we can call, which is add inline. So we're gonna say add inline. So the add inline, it's gonna take a content ID. So if I put my mouse over here, it's gonna need a content ID. And you see at the bottom here, it says the content ID has to be enclosed with or less than sign or greater than sign. Okay, so the ID is gonna be embedded inside of these open and closing bracket. So I'm gonna go ahead and make the change in all the methods. So I'm gonna paste it in here. So instead of add attachment, we're gonna say add line. And then we're gonna make sure that when we pass the name of the file, we can put the opening and closing bracket. So you can do something like this. So you can say opening and then plus, and then you do the closing. So you do plus and then closing. So that will work just fine, but it looks a little bit messy. So let's create another helper method at the bottom that's gonna just do this for us. So I'm gonna scroll down and just gonna copy this private, and then I'm gonna go down and paste it down. I'm gonna change the name to get content ID because this is the name that this thing has, like the first parameter. So if I put my mouse on here, you can see it's content ID. So I'm gonna name this get content ID, and then I'm gonna format it a little. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to take the file name. So in here, we're gonna take a string that's going to be the file name. So string file name. And what we need to do is to just put the closing and the opening around the file name. So I'm gonna say open, and then we're gonna pass in the file name. So we're gonna say file name, and then plus, and then open, and I'm going to change this to a string. Okay, so we're returning the string, which is just the file name with the opening bracket and the closing bracket. And that's all we have to do here. And I'm going to remove the space at the bottom. So now we can go and just call this method. So instead of doing all this stuff here, I'm going to get the file name and then pass in the get content. So get content ID, and then pass in the file. Then I'm just going to copy this, replace it here, just like that, and then pass in the appropriate file. So change this to the homework and change this to the dog. Too many of these here. Okay, so we're passing in the content ID, which is pretty much going to be the file, and then pass in the file. So the one thing that I want to say is I don't know what's going to happen with the homework. I do know that the pictures will be embedded in the email, but I'm not sure how the mail client is going to try to display this very large file, which is this homework file, within the email itself as an inline attachment. But we're just going to go ahead and try it out. So let's go back to the database, and we're going to just delete again. All right, so we should be able to register a new user. Let's go back to the application, and we're going to call this method. So copy this, and we're gonna go down, call the email service. So we're gonna say email service that pass this name in, and we're pretty much gonna pass the same information. So I can just copy everything inside of this method, just paste them in here. And then what we're going to do is we're gonna comment out this one above because we don't want to send duplicate emails. Okay, so that should look good. And then we're gonna go ahead and restart, rerun. So now we should be good to go. You can see we have no errors. Okay, everything looks good. Let's go back to Postman, and I'm gonna go ahead and send this request one more time. Okay, we got 2 uncreated. Let's go back to the app, scroll down. There's no errors. Let's go back to the database. We should see the new user. Okay, the user is here. Obviously their confirmation is also here, but we can check anyway. Okay, confirmation is here. Now I'm gonna go to my emails. I got nothing yet. And oh, there it is. So you can see that we have the new email, and I'm just gonna go ahead and open it up. So you see now Gmail tells me that I have 3 attachments, and this one didn't have any name. So it says no name, but it looks like it's still the 7.1 megabyte, but it wasn't rendered properly because you see that I can't see the preview, and I bet if I click on it, I won't be able to see anything. Okay, so I can't see anything. So obviously something was different here. So what I'm gonna do is to just delete this, and let's go back to the database. Well, I'm gonna also delete it in my trash, delete forever, and then I'm gonna go back to my database, and then I'm gonna use a different email address. So it's delete this confirmation and then delete the user. We delete the confirmation first because of the foreign key constraint, otherwise it's gonna give us an error. So you have to delete the confirmation first and then delete the user, or you can disable that altogether. So now we deleted this, and now let's go back to Postman. This time I'm gonna use another email, which is an Outlook. So I'm gonna just change this here. I'm gonna blur this because this is my personal email, so just so you know. So I put in this new email, which is an Outlook email, and then I'm gonna go ahead and register this new user. So I'm gonna click send. Okay, we got 2 uncreated. Now I'm gonna open this Outlook account, and you can see the very first email at the very top is the email that I got for the new user verification. And you see the little exclamation mark that is all in red. That's because I set the priority to 1. So that's the highest priority for an email. When we were looking at the email in Gmail, we didn't see any indication that the email was a priority 1, which is like the highest priority. But you can see that in Outlook, we can actually see that because the email is a very high priority email, then we have this red exclamation mark. Okay, so now let's open this email. I'm gonna click on it. So you can see a difference. You can see that these files are still edited as attachment, but they're actually in the email badge. So I can click on one of them, and I can preview it, and I can even scroll over to the next one. But for some reason, you can see the homework file is not being displayed properly. So I would say definitely avoid sending large files in the email body like this. Just send them as attachments. But if they're images, then obviously you can send them. I wonder if I use a smaller file size, if that would be the case, but I'm not sure. But in any case, you can see now we have these two pictures. They're kind of like inside of the email body, even though it says attachment, but they're like in the email body. I guess they're still attachment, but you know, we can click on them in the email body. You don't have to download them or anything like that. And also it doesn't work for the file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the difference in Outlook. So I'm going to close out of this and then I'm going to delete this. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this message, and then I'm going to go back to the application, and then I'm going to go to the user service, and then I'm going to comment this one out and then comment the one before. So the one that is just pure attachment, I'm going to uncomment it, and then I'm going to rerun. Okay, so we're going to rerun. Then I'm going to go back to the database and then delete the user. Okay, so I'm going to send another request with the Outlook email again. So let's make sure the application is up and running. Okay, up and running. So let's go back to Postman, and we're going to send that request again with the Outlook email. And then let's go back. Everything looks good. So let's go back to my email. And I got the email, so you can see that the email is different. So looking at it before we open it, before we click on it, you can see that it doesn't show us the little image icons, because when we had the inline, like when we add them inside of the email body itself, even in the preview, you could see that they had the little preview of the file, like the little file icon was showing. But now you can see that it only showed the little attachment symbol. So you can see there's a difference. So now if I click on it, it still kind of looked the same, but now you see that the homework is properly displayed because they're like put inside of the email as real attachment. So there's no problem because it was just added as an attachment, not embedded in the HTML itself. So that wasn't causing any problem. So I would say if you have files other than images, then you can attachment in a simple text email like this, but otherwise just put them in as attachment. Unless they're images, of course, but otherwise just use them as proper attachment. So that's what I wanted to show you, the example in how depending on the email client, then it's going to look different. So you can see the difference between Outlook and Gmail, and it's going to be different for other email clients as well. And I can still click on these files, so they should open just normal. And I think even the document will open. I'm going to blur it out, but I'm just going to go ahead and click on it. And you can see that we can see a preview of it. Or actually, we can see the whole thing. You can see we can scroll. So it's properly displayed because it's added as an attachment and it wasn't embedded in the email body itself. So again, just to be safe, if you want to send embedded files, as long as they're images, I would say that's safe to do. But if they're like other types of file, I would just send them as attached, just to be safe. It should work, but as you can see, the email clients, they're having problems displaying the files that are not images. So I would just avoid doing that. Okay, so all right, let's close out of here. And I'm just gonna go ahead and delete this email because I don't need these emails. So now what are we going to do? So let's go back to the application. We're almost done. So let's scroll down here, go back to the email implementation. So we have send attachment, so a normal attachment, and then we have try to send attachment in the body of the email. In this case, we saw that it worked mostly for images. So what we're going to be working on next is this next one. So send my messages with embedded files. So I think this is a duplicate because you can either pass in images like we're doing for the first two, and then you can also pass in a file, which the email clients have difficulties displaying. So I think what I'm going to do is to just change this to this one. So send with files because we're sending all kinds of files, and then just get rid of this one because it's definitely a duplicate. And we're going to do the same thing in the service. So this one can be deleted. So now we should be good. So for embedded files, one more time, just make sure that you send embedded images. And if it's any other files, then make sure you pass it in as an attachment. So that's what I would do. Okay, so we're done with this. So next, what we're going to be working on is this very interesting one, which is to send an HTML email. So far, everything we've been doing has been sending text emails. We haven't been sending any rich emails that looks like an HTML page that are similar to the ones that you get from, like Amazon or things like that, like with pictures, and it just looks almost like a web page. So this is what we're going to learn how to do now. We're going to learn how to send an HTML email that looks almost like a web page when you open the email. So the first thing that I want to do is to show you the template that we're going to be using for this, because we need to have some kind of HTML and CSS together so that we can send the email. And I'm going to go back to the browser, and I just kind of like Google like a simple HTML CSS email, and then I got this web page, and then I just look at this one and it looks pretty cool. So I made some modification to it, but I'm just showing you where it's coming from because it's not something that I created myself. So even if it's free to use, you got to give credit to whoever created the content that you're using. But in any case, I'm gonna put the hello and then the name of the user at the top here, and then some random message, and then the button to activate your account is going to be this button, and then we're gonna say, you know, thank you, the support team or whatever. One thing I want to bring to your attention is if we scroll down here, you'll notice that I'm gonna see if I can zoom in a little more. So you'll notice that this is a table. So the whole HTML, like this whole thing, is a table. Okay, so the whole thing is a table. You can see it starts with a table. So the reason for this is because mail servers, they're not like a web browser, so they can't really parse all the different HTML elements, but they can parse tables very well. So that's why they make these as tables. So they just kind of style it to make it look like an actual web page, but in reality it's really just a table. So that's what I'm going to be using, and I already took the code and make some small changes to it, and I'm just going to show you what it looks like. So let's go back to the application, and I'm just going to go over to the resources. So inside of my templates here, remember we have TimeLeaf install, so we can use templates. I'm going to right click, and then I'm going to do new. This is going to be a simple file. So we're going to say HTML file. This is going to be the email template. Press enter. So now we have this email template that we can use. And then I'm just gonna go ahead and just paste the code for it, which is the same code that I just showed you with some small changes. So let's go over the small changes that I made. So here is where we say hello and then the name of the user. And since I'm using TimeLeaf, so I get th text, which is gonna dynamically change the text of this strong tag inside, and then by passing in the name. So whatever name that we pass in the Java code to this template, the TimeLeaf template engine is going to replace it with this name. So it's going to be like hello junior or something. And then all of this is hard coded, so nothing fancy here. And then at the bottom here, we have the link to verify my account, which is the button that you saw. And then I do the same. So href, and then you pass in the URL the same way. So quote, $, open curly braces, the URL, and then close curly braces. And TimeLeaf will just replace this URL to whatever URL you pass in the Java code. And this th is how you invoke the template engine, so TimeLeaf. So you do th, colon, and then the actual HTML property on the HTML element. So this is the href, and in this case, well, not really, because this would be like text content or something like that, or inner HTML, but in this case, it's just text. But you get the idea. We want to pass in some text, and then we set it to this value. I'm going to be talking more about this image. That's how you embed an image. You have to pass in the image tag or any file really, and then you pass in CID for content ID, and then a colon, and then the ID of the file that you want to pass. So we're not going to be using this yet. I'm going to put it in comments, okay? Because we're not going to use it yet, but we're going to use the URL and also the name of the user. So that's the template that we're going to be using. So this is going to be what's going to be sent in the email body with all of these values. So now we know that we have to pass in a name, and also we have to pass in a URL, because those are the names that we're denoting here. So we can close this template, so the email template.html, and then in here we're gonna do something very simple. So I'm just gonna copy everything in here. We're gonna delete most of it though, because this is gonna be a little bit different, and then go and paste it in here. Okay, so first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna do all this stuff again. Okay, so all of this stuff we're still gonna do. We're not gonna have any files, so I'm gonna remove the attachments part. So I'm gonna remove that, and then I'm gonna do something called context. So we're gonna call the context, call it context, and then we're gonna set it equal to a new context. Okay, so I don't think this was imported from the right place. I'm gonna scroll up a little more and remove this import. That's not the proper import. And then I'm gonna scroll down and try to re-import it. So go here, and then more action, see if I can import it again. It's supposed to come from TimeLeaf. So let's try to import that. So import, and let's scroll down, and you can see org.timeleaf.context. Okay, so this is the one that we want. So this context right here. And then we're gonna say context that set variable. So we're gonna call, you can put set variable, so there's two. So there's this first one, you can call it multiple times. So we could call this one, and then we say the name is gonna be the name, so the name in the template, and then we're gonna pass in the name that we want. So we're gonna say user, oh well, we already get the name, so the name, and then we can do it again. So we can copy this, and then the next one is the URL, and then we're gonna pass in the URL. So we can say get verification URL. We can pass in the host and the token. Make sure we import this. So let's go back here, and this private, I'm just gonna make it public. So make this public, and now the error should be gone. So we get the verification URL by passing in the host and the token. Or you can just do context that set variable, the one that takes a map, and then you can do a map of, so you can do that as well. And then you can pass in the same thing. So you can say the first one is going to be the name. So you pass that in there. And then the second key value pair is going to be the URL. So you can just pass this in there as well. So you can do it in 2 strokes, like right here, or in 1 stroke. So I'm going to comment this out, but at least you know that you can do that. Okay, so we're going to pass in these variables and the context. Remember that this name, so this key here in this URL here, are the keys that we have, or the variables that we have. So the URL in the template and the name in the template. So they have to match. Okay, so you have to make sure that you match this key, so the name and the URL, to whatever key or whatever placeholder that you have in the template. So this name here, also the URL. Okay, so that's that. And then what we're going to do, we're going to say string, which is going to be the text message. We're going to set it equal to, we need the template engine. Okay, so that's going to come from, well, that's the template engine. So the template engine that we want to call process, and then we're going to pass it the name of the template. So email template. You can pass in that HTML, or you can just leave it like that. I don't think it should matter. And then you're passing in the context. Okay, so we need to inject this email template. So let's scroll to the top, and then we're going to say private final, and then we're gonna pass in the template engine. So template engine from Timeleaf, and then we're gonna name it template engine. Okay, so that's gonna be the dependency injection. So this should be good for now. Okay, so we call in the template, and then we call process, pass in the template name. We can just pass this in as a constant. So we can say email template, for example. So email underscore template. Okay, and then pass in the context, which has the name and the URL. So that's gonna be the text message now that we need to pass into the email. So the same way after that, we're gonna call the my message, call the helper, set the priority, set the subject, set the from, set the to, and then when we set the text, we're just gonna pass in this text. So I'm gonna say set text, and then there's another variable that we can pass in here, which is true, which means that this is HTML text, not just a simple string text. So if you go in there, you'll see that this is the one that we're calling. So we pass in the text, and then we say it's HTML. If I scroll up a little, you can see this one where we just pass in the simple text. So they're doing method overloading. So that's all we have to do for this. So what we're going to do is to just pass this send email. So let's go back to the user service. Then I'm gonna go down, and then we're gonna say email service that send HTML email. So that one here, and then they take the same thing. So we're gonna pass in all these values, pass them in here. So I'm gonna rerun this, and then we're gonna just give it a second to come up here. I'm gonna go back to the database, go back here. I'm gonna close this. We're gonna delete any confirmation if we had any, delete any users if we had any. Then I'm also gonna close my Outlook account. We're just gonna be using the Gmail at this point, and then go back to Postman, and then send the request again. So we're gonna click send. Okay, so we got another 201. Let's go back to the backend just to make sure we didn't get any errors. Okay, so everything looks good. So there's no errors. Now let's go ahead and check our Gmail. So I'm gonna go back here and go to my Gmail. Just gonna go ahead and refresh, and you can see it's right here. Okay, so I just refreshed and it just came through, and I can go ahead and open that, and you can see now it looks exactly the way that we were expecting it to look. So you can see pass in my name here, and this is just whatever. I just typed some other stuff here, it just doesn't really matter. So this message is gonna be for you to change. And then we have the verify my account. So this link, if I hover over it, and if you look to the bottom left corner, you can see that it's pointing to our backend. So if I click that, then it should verify the account. Okay, so you can see how you can send a rich email that looks like an HTML page. And you can add attachment, and I'm gonna show you that. So we're gonna add attachments, like real attachment. We're also gonna add another embedded attachment, like we're gonna add an image inside of this HTML, I guess you can say HTML page that we have here. Okay, so that's how you do this. So now what we're gonna do is to pass in files. So now we know how to send a rich HTML email, right? You can see it here. So we know how to do that. Now we're gonna see if we can pass in attachment and embedded files inside of this email. So that's the last thing that we have to do. So I'm gonna go ahead and delete this message and just gonna delete it forever. So go in my spam, just delete it. And then let's go back to the application. So now we're gonna work on this so that we can send file. You can add attachment to this the same way that we did on here. Like you can do this. It'll work the same way. It will pass in the message body as the HTML, and then it will pass in these as attachment. So that's pretty easy. I mean, just for show, I can just copy all these and just go down here and we can just paste all this stuff. So we're passing in some more attachment and just rerun it. So rerun, just gonna give it a second to start. Okay, so we're up and running. Go back to the database, just delete everything in case we had anything, I don't remember. And then we're gonna go back to Postman, just send them one more time, just so you can see that you can put attachment. And let's go back to my email. Let's refresh. Just gonna give it a moment to come through, and you can see the email just came through. So I'm gonna open it up and you see that we have the same body, and then at the bottom here we have our 3 files. So you can do that if you would like. It's gonna be the same thing. It's gonna be pretty easy. So let's go back to the application one more time. So I'm gonna just comment this out, but just so you know, you can do that as well. Okay, all right, so now what we're going to do is to work on this right here. So let's go again, just copy everything here. This is gonna be a little bit different. So even if we copy, we're gonna make a lot of changes, and then I'm gonna paste it in here. So let's work on this right now. So what are we gonna do? We need to embed images inside of this template, right? So the first thing that I'm going to do is to enable this. So we're gonna place the image in here. We're gonna give it an ID of image, which is the content ID. So the CID is content ID. We're passing in this one image in here inside of this image tag so that it can be displayed like it would in an HTML. So that is that. So now I need to go back here. So we're gonna get the context. We're gonna set all the variables. We're gonna create the my message. Actually, we can pass this at the beginning. I feel like it makes more sense at the beginning. So we create the my message, get the helper, set the everything. So this text here, we're gonna set it at the bottom. So let's just put this in comments. So let's comment that out. And then we're gonna get the context. We're gonna set the variables. Let me see what I have here. Okay, so I just have the example where you can use set variable. So I'm gonna get rid of that because I don't want to confuse you. You already know that we have this commented out somewhere here, right here. Okay, so if you want to, you can see this here. Okay, so back down, let me collapse this. All right, so we're gonna do the same thing we did. So get the my message, get the helper, set the priority, set the subject, the from email, and the to email. And then we're gonna get the context. We're not gonna set any text. So I comment this out. And then we're gonna get the context again, pass in this variable. So we need the name and the URL, which we did before. So that's that. And then we're gonna process the template by passing in the context, which contains the variable that we're passing in inside of the HTML or inside of the template. And then I'm gonna create something called a my multi-part. Okay, so that's gonna be the multi-part, and then I'm gonna set it equal to a new my multi-part, and then I need to pass in related. So this is the first step, and then I'm gonna define something called a body part. So that's gonna be the body part. I'm gonna name it message body part equal the same thing, new my body part. Okay, so now we have a multi-part, and also we have a message body part. First thing we're gonna do is we're gonna take the message body part, we're gonna call set content, and then we're gonna pass in the text. So the text that is coming from the template. So this text right here, which is literally the whole HTML template, but as a string. And then we're gonna say this is gonna be text.html. And that's just the type or the encoding. So we're gonna say text forward slash HTML. And then let's just do right click, refactor, go to constant. So text HTML, we can say encoding. Okay, so that's what that is. So we're gonna set the content, which is the content of the template, on the message body. So this message body part here, set content. And then I'm gonna call the multi-part that, and then I need to call add body. Okay, so you can say it takes a body part, and you can put an index to see which one comes first or second. But in this case, I'm just gonna pass in the first one first. So that's gonna be the message body. So what we're doing technically is we're saying we're gonna send an email. The first part of it is going to be this text, which will have, you know, hello, whatever, hello, so and so, and then some random text, and then the URL. Okay, so we're passing in here this message body part. We pass in the content, so this email content, to it right here. Okay, so that's the first thing that we have to do. So I can add a comment here. I can say add HTML email body. Okay, so that's what this is doing, this whole thing right here. So that's the first body part. I need a second body part, so I can just copy this. So I'm gonna copy this and then go down here. Then I'm gonna say add images to the email body. So we're gonna redefine this. So I'm just redefine this or reinitialize this message body part. I could use a different variable name, but I'm gonna use the same one because it doesn't really matter because it's being reinitialized. So I add the HTML and the multi part, which is the email that has multi different parts of it. The first part is just the message body, which is in this case the text, which is the HTML. The second part is going to be the image. So I regenerate another message body because I need to add this to this multi-part. That's why it's called multi-part, because we can pass in many different parts to it. So we already pass in the text, which comes from the engine, template engine, which has the name and the URL. Okay, so hopefully you're following. So now we're gonna add another body to this email, but this time it's going to be a data source. So we're gonna say data source, and then we're gonna set it equal. So that's the data source, and then we're gonna set it equal to a new file data source. So file data source, and then we're gonna let's grab the dog. So let's scroll up here and let's get this dog. So we're gonna copy from the system. We're just pointing to that particular file on our system. So I'm gonna scroll down here and then we're gonna pass it in here. Okay, so that is the new file that we're gonna be adding as a data source. And I'm just gonna go ahead and see if I can import this. So this is data source with a capital S, import. Okay, so that's the data source. And then I'm gonna call this message body part, and I need to delete one of these. Okay, so I'm gonna go down, and then I'm gonna say the message body, which is the one that I redefine up here. Okay, I need to call set handler. So this one at the bottom here, and I'm gonna pass in a new data handler, and then passing in this data source. So we're gonna say data source. So we're passing in this image inside of this message body. Remember, this is the second message body. So the first one was just the text. Now we're adding in this image to it. So after that, very important is we're gonna pass in the content ID. So here we're gonna say set header. So the second one, and then this is gonna be the content and dash ID. So this is a header, so you have to spell it exactly the way that I spell it because it's an existing header in like the HTML. And then we're gonna pass in the value. So in this case, I'm gonna pass in image. Okay, so this image has to match this image. Okay, so this image placeholder, they have to match with this image. Okay, that's just the content name, which is an existing header name. And then this is the image that we have to match with the template, which is right here. Okay, so that's that. So this is the second part, and now we need to add the second part to the multi part. Okay, because we have one here and then we have one here. So for that first one that is highlighted, we add it to the multi part. So we're gonna do the same thing. So I'm gonna copy this line and then paste it here. So this body part here is this new one right here because it's reinitialized. Okay, if you want, again, you can use another variable for this, like you just reinitialize it like this and then give it a different name. Well, actually, I think I'll just do that so that don't confuse you very much. So I'm going to copy this and then paste it here because I feel like for people that are trying to learn this, it's going to be easier to understand. So I'm going to say image body part. Okay, so that's the image part of the email. And then we're gonna pass this in here everywhere and then pass it in the multi-part. So we create another body part. We get the file, and then on that body part, we set the file, and then we pass in this header so that it knows where to put the image. And then we add it again, the same thing that we're doing here. We add this part to the multi-part. Now this multi-part is initialized here. So it's not in the email anywhere, which is what we're sending at the very end. Just let me put a space here. So we have one body part that we're adding to the multi-part, and then we have another body part that we're adding to the multi-part again. But the multi-part itself, you can see it's declared here. It's not added to this message in any way, shape, or form. So we need to edit. So to do this, I'm gonna come down here. I'm gonna say message. Oops, we want the message. So the one from the beginning, this message. Okay, we're gonna pass in this multi-part, which contains the image. Well, first it contains the text, the HTML text, and then the image. So we need to pass this multi-part to the image. So now we're gonna say set content. You can see it takes the multi-part, and then we're gonna pass in the my multi-part. So now when we send this message, all of these will be added to that email message. So hopefully this is coming together. And again, if you have any question, feel free to reach out to me, but this is what we're going to do. Obviously, we're doing all this work in one method, but we can easily externalize like this part right here. You can have one for a file and one for a text message. Okay, so you can make the method that you're gonna have either take a string or it takes a data source or whatever, or something like that. But it's really easy to externalize these two parts right here so that you don't have to do this twice like this. But we're not gonna worry about this now. So this is adding everything to the message. We're adding the multipart to the actual email, and the multipart contain first the text, so the HTML text. You could also pass in just regular text to this, and then you would pass in the encoding as text/plain, just regular text. But in this case, it's HTML, so we're passing the text.html for the type. Okay, so you can see here the type of the message type. Okay, so hopefully this is coming together and everything makes sense. So now what we're gonna do is to just copy this name, go back to the email service or user service in this case, call the email service that, and then pass in this name and then pass in the same parameters. So we're gonna copy all of this and then paste it in here and then put the semicolon and then make sure we comment this out so that we don't get two of them. I'm gonna go ahead and rerun the application, and then we're gonna go back to the database. Well, I'm also gonna delete this message, go back to the database, delete any confirmation, delete any users, and also go back to make sure the app is up and running. So you can see we're up and running. So let's go back to Postman and just hit send and just give this a second. So everything is successful. Let's go back. Application doesn't have any errors. Okay, so it looks good. Now let's go back to our email. Let's go back here and I'm gonna, oh, there it is. So you can see we have the new email. I'm gonna go ahead and open it up and you can see the image is embedded inside of the HTML. So the image is rather large because it's a big image. So you can see it inside exactly where we specified that the file should be in the template. Okay, so you can see it right here, the way that we're expecting. So the image is a little bit too large. Obviously, we don't want to do this. So you can see this is spilling over and I have to scroll over. Even when I scroll over, I can't even see the whole picture. So let's delete this one more time. And let's go back to more and go to my trash, delete everything forever. Go back to my inbox and let's just delete everything here. We're gonna do one last test. So delete and also delete any users and then go back to the application. So the first thing that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go back and, well, I need to go back here. So inside of this image, right? So this image, we're replacing the image. Hopefully you guys have some HTML knowledge. So I'm gonna pass in style and then I'm gonna give it a width. Okay, and let's do maybe 300 pixel. So 300 pixel for the width of the image, and then the height should adjust automatically. And you can pass in more style here if you would like, but we're just gonna give it a width of 300 pixel so that it doesn't spill over. So now I'm gonna reload and rerun. So let's go back to run. Okay, we're up and running. Let's go back to Postman and go ahead and send this one more time. Okay, so this is successful. Let's go back to our email. Well, let's check to see if we don't have any errors. Okay, so everything looks good. Let's go back and go back to our email. I'm gonna refresh, just give it a second here, and there it is. Okay, so there's our email. If I open it now, you can see we have the text and then we have the dog embedded inside of the HTML. We should have put a new line here just so that we can make this go on its own line. And then we have our link. So if I hover over it, you can see at the bottom, it's gonna take us to verifying the user account, and we have our image. So let's go ahead and fix that real quick. So let's go back to the code and let's go back to the HTML template. And then in addition to the width, I'm gonna give it a display of block. Okay, so that it can display on its own line and then push the next element on the new line. So let's refresh and let's go back to the browser, delete this message, go to more, trash, delete it, go back to the inbox, close this tab, go back here, delete one more time. Okay, go back to Postman and then send that one more last time. There we go. Now go back to my email, refresh, and there's the new email. So I'm gonna click on it and you can see, well, we should have put some space at the bottom, but that's good. So now you can see we have this beautiful dog and we can even click on it. It will show up, pop up here, and yeah, so that's everything. So at this point, you should be able to send any type of emails that you would like to send using a Spring Boot application. And this is really just an example. It's a little bit messy, So it's up to you to clean things up and make sure that you don't have a very huge method that's doing like many different things. But you can do that if you would like. So that's all I had, and I'm just gonna make sure that I add some space at the bottom here. So whenever you get this file, you will see that everything displays a little bit better on the UI. Okay, so that's all we have to do. And again, if you have any questions, reach out to me and let me know. Make sure you check the description so that you can get the source code. And this source code is really free to use, so you can just take it and then use it in your application. It's totally free, so there's no problem there. And like I said, sending email is a big part of any application, because you know that almost every institution that you interact with, they have a way to communicate with you, and one of the most common ways is to use your email address. So knowing how to make use of your clients or customers' email address or your clientele email addresses is really important, and that's what I wanted to show you in this course. So you can send simple text emails with attachments, and everything in between. And again, any questions, let me know. Either reach out to me on social media or join the Discord. Just ask me your questions there. And with that, I will see you in the next one.